In today's video, I want to touch base on one of the most common oversights that I see people make relative to their workout regimen and the tracking of their progressions. One of my favorite quotes from Peter Drucker is, "If you don't measure it, you can't manage it." And unfortunately, a lot of people don't even measure their workouts at all. Therefore, it becomes very tough to manage them long term. But some people at least have the basic foundation of measurement. They might have a journal or an app where they write down what they do on a workout to workout basis. And that's an excellent starting point. But the oversight that is most common is relative to secondary exercises. So oftentimes I'll work with clients who in the past had tracked their bench press, their squat, their deadlift, and variations of those main exercises. But when it came time for secondary exercises, they had no data points whatsoever. Or they painted their secondary exercises with such a broad brushstroke that they weren't really sure how strong they were on specific exercises. This information is extremely valuable, both as a trainee who's managing their own programming as well as for a coach who's managing a client's programming, simply because those secondary exercises take up about 80% of your programming. And the reality is, they form the foundation of your strength and muscular development that's going to contribute to the progressions that you're able to make on the bigger lifts. So as you can see, just as an example, obviously not all secondary exercises are done on cable machines, but it's very common for people to incorporate exercises such as pull downs, rows, press downs, cable flies, curls, etc. They will likely make up a significant percentage of that 80% of your programming. So if that's the case, as you can see, just what's visible here, there's quite a few different attachments at your disposal. Doing a mid-cable row with a close grip, neutral hand positioning should not be measured as would be a wide grip row with your hands on the outside of the bend of the bar. Further, it should not be measured the same as a thick handle that has a significantly greater diameter and thus is much more challenging to work with pound for pound. The reality is that each one of these attachments and all of the other attachments that you could possibly get your hands on present a slightly varied degree of stress. Consider you might be able to do a cable row with this attachment with 120 pounds for 15 reps. With this attachment, maybe 110 pounds for 15 reps. And with this attachment, maybe 90 pounds for 12 reps. Obviously, each one of them has a different degree of strength with which you're able to express on that specific exercise. And to assume that you could just do the same weight because it's a cable row is such a broad assumption that will actually prove to be a hindrance to your progress moving forward if you don't have detailed data points on what you can actually do on each specific exercise. This is also important to consider in terms of measurement specificity, because as you become stronger and you begin to rotate the secondary variations with a greater degree of frequency, you want to have solid reference points to look back to. If you're unsure of where you left off with a specific exercise, then you might end up injuring yourself because you put 120 pounds on the row with this handle when it should have been assigned to this handle. Further, you might just waste your time because you might have been able to do 120 pounds with this handle and you started off with 90. So you had to do 3 sets to get up to the point where the weight was adequate, and then once you got there, you were already slightly fatigued from troubleshooting. And it seems tedious, and possibly it is, but for those who are trying to make the most progress over time, this is a very valuable metric to be aware of on a variation basis, a per variation basis. And I consider this important not just on specialty attachments and traditional attachments, but also variations of secondary exercises that you might execute with a barbell or a dumbbell Don't measure them the same just because they're a similar movement pattern. If you're doing a barbell row with a straight bar, and then you do a barbell row with a Swiss bar, don't track them the same. Your grip placements are completely different, and the tracking of your workout should reflect that. Finally, not only are these numbers important, considering reference points to ensure that you're actually managing your volume and loading of all of these different secondary variations, considering that there's a big difference between showing up and doing a wide grip pull down that you haven't done in 6 months and increasing the volume by 0.25% than it is to start off too low and not drive any more stress whatsoever. But it's also valuable to determine over time, and this does take a lot of time to start to recognize, but which secondary exercises are actually contributing the most to your individual progress. You'll learn which variations work best for you because you'll notice that you make the most progress on your primary reference lifts when these certain secondary exercises or rep ranges are present. Compiling this information will of course allow you to pivot with much more efficiency in your programming moving forward, and thus making the time you spend in the gym much more effective. And yes, I've certainly found the tracking of all of these data points to be somewhat tedious at times, but on the flip side, the amount of time it saves me long term being aware of all of this information is extremely useful. Not to mention, I've also noticed since I've begun doing this that I never feel beat up or injured, and very rarely do I feel like I'm not making progress, because I'm determined to move things forward, even if the needle moves slowly, on everything that I possibly can as often as I possibly can. And showing up and knowing that, hey, you know what? I might move the needle 0.25% on any given secondary exercise. It becomes very intoxicating. It's encouraging, right? You feel like every time you show up, you're getting just a little bit better. And there's something to be said for that psychological component of training. Showing up and expecting to win because you're used to winning. Regardless of how small those victories may be, they do add up over time. And referencing that Peter Drucker quote again, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it.